Test 1. Listening Part 1. Exam practice. You'll hear people talking in 8 different situations. For questions 1 to 8, choose the best answer, A, B or C. 1. You hear a girl talking about a running race she is going to compete in soon.
It's the big running race on Saturday, and I know loads of local people are coming along to watch and cheer. I'm feeling really nervous about it, which is a bit unexpected. But then a lot depends on the result this time. If I win, I can go on to compete in the national championships. That's putting a lot of pressure on me. I just know the other competitors will have spent months preparing for it, and I can't really claim that, if I'm honest. So I suppose if I don't get the result I'm hoping for, which is likely, I've only got myself to blame.
2. You hear the beginning of a radio program for teenagers.
Here with me today is scientist Louise Jason, who's going to tell us what's coming up in today's programme. Louise.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, our regular listeners will remember the fascinating discussions we've had on this programme regarding the future of the planet. We've covered just about everything, haven't we? From the effects of global warming to the way we release far too many toxic gases into the atmosphere. And we've been particularly interested in the effects of all this on wildlife worldwide. And that's our focus this morning, how the next generation should deal with all these problems and avoid the loss of any more rare species if they can.
3. You overhear a boy phoning a friend.
Hi Jake, it's Alfie. I'm just ringing about our school geography quiz next week. Hope you've been practicing. As you know, there's a great prize for the winners, and our team's got a really good chance of getting it. But Tom Sutton's just rung me to say he's got to drop out because he's not well, and he was really good. Anyway, we need another team member, so how about Fergus? Shall I ask him instead? Oh, and my dad says we can pick you up in the car on the way there if you haven't got any transport. Let me know.
4. You hear 2 friends talking about a school photography exhibition.
Hi, Sam. I'm just off to the school photography exhibition, and I'm guessing there's lots of your stuff on the walls. You're a great photographer.
Oh, my teacher asked me to put some up, but nothing's ready. The most recent ones still need some work. The ones I showed you?
Well, they looked brilliant to me. I know you wanted to work on the colours a bit on your laptop, but I bet none of the photos in the exhibition are as good as those. You should give it a go. It's not too late.
Well, I'll come with you and have a look. Then I'll see what I think.
5. You hear 2 friends talking about a shopping trip they've just been on.
Phew, I'm exhausted after all that walking around the shops. I need a nice cool drink.
Yeah, there were far more than I'd expected, with just about everything you could ever want.
Except the T-shirt you were looking for. We must have gone into every single shop.
Oh, never mind. I'm sure I'll find one eventually. And at least I didn't go and buy that dress I saw. It was lovely, but I couldn't really afford it. So I would have regretted it if I got it. Anyway, now I've got something left to go shopping with next week.
Yeah, well, maybe your friend Maisie could go with you next time.
6. You hear a girl talking about her class trip to the theatre to see a play.
We had a trip to the theatre last week, which all my class went on, to see a play we'd been studying in class. We all knew what it was supposed to be like, and there are several scary bits in it, but even though I knew when they were coming, I still hid behind my school bag. The thing was, though, I didn't recognise some parts of the storyline,
or even aspects of the characters, even though we'd all read it really carefully and acted out bits of it on stage at school. It's a difficult play, no doubt about that, but I'd somehow expected to feel more familiar with it.
7. You hear two friends talking about a canoeing lesson they have just had on the river.
Wow, that was amazing! I'm glad we gave canoeing a try, aren't you?
Absolutely. And I'm pleased I did all that weight training beforehand. Otherwise, my arms would have ached much more than they did.
I probably should have done that then. My muscles were really sore. And the canoe tipped from side to side quite a bit. I was scared I was going to fall in amongst those rocks.
My brother warned me about that, but I was still anxious about going for a freezing swim on a few occasions. At least I managed to paddle the canoe in a straight line.
Yeah, I never did get that right. You were really impressive.
Thanks.
8. You hear a teacher telling a class about a science project they are going to do.
Now, this term, we're going to be doing lots of work on our science project about discoveries in medicine. We'll be spending a lot of time in our school lab during our classes, of course, and I've got some experiments lined up for you to do there. But I've also got a trip planned to the Medical Institute in the city centre. Now, I know many of you think museums are boring, but I promise you this one is fascinating, so we'll all go there together. And for your homework, you'll each have some research to do in the library here before we head off to the city centre. Right, let's get started.
Test 1. Listening, Part 2. Exam practice. You'll hear a girl called Flora telling her class about a recent trip to South Africa, where she saw some animals called meerkats. For questions 9 to 18, complete the sentences with a word or short phrase. You now have 45 seconds to look at Part 2.
My name's Flora, and I want to tell you about a fantastic trip I did with my parents and sister earlier this year. It really was the trip of a lifetime, as we went all the way to South Africa to visit relatives there. But we also got to see some of the sights and the wildlife, including a colony of meerkats. On the day we went to see them, we got up really early and drove off to meet our brilliant guide, Gavin. He was incredibly knowledgeable about meerkats. For example, he told us that early explorers thought the meerkat was like a sort of desert monkey, although apparently some people say the meaning of the name is lake cat, even though it never goes anywhere near water. And in one region, the meerkat is still known as the sun angel, as it was thought to help warn farmers of possible dangers to their cattle. Gavin also told us that meerkats can live in captivity for a long time, but for far less in the wild, in the desert areas where they tend to make their homes. This is due to things like changes in their habitat. Once we'd arrived at the place where the meerkats lived, we were given hot drinks and chairs to sit in while we waited. Gavin also gave us some blankets, which I hadn't really expected as we were in a desert area. But then it had been cold in our car that morning, so we were glad of the extra warmth. We would have been freezing otherwise. Because Gavin knew the area so well, we didn't have long to wait to see our first meerkats. He'd spent months in the area observing the meerkats and being close to them so that they got used to his presence and his scent, and most especially his voice, which might have frightened them away. As a result, he was able to talk to us easily without scaring the meerkats, although we stayed a bit further away. The meerkats stood looking around near their holes where they lived. They were really fun to watch, with their sweet faces and long, thin tails, which Gavin said they use not only for balancing, but also for signalling to other meerkats if they want to warn them of danger. Gavin told us that when everything is okay, they stand on their back legs and make little peeping noises to the rest of their group. But as soon as they see anything out of the ordinary, they bark, which they did while we were there when they saw an eagle flying over, and they all disappeared underground for a while. And apparently they can also whistle to each other too. We got a really good view of the animals through our binoculars. They have lovely fawn-coloured fur coats, but there's not much fur on their black tummies. That's because they need to absorb the warmth of the sun. They also have stripes across their back, which are unique. Gavin said that they allowed him to identify each meerkat quite easily. Gavin also doesn't feed the meerkats, but encourages them to search for food in the ground. While we watched them, one found some plants to eat, and others found some spiders, which they shared as a tasty treat. Gavin told us he'd even seen them eat small birds, although they seemed to prefer things like insects. Of course, we all wanted to take a meerkat home, but Gavin told us they don't make good pets because they're wild animals. So instead, we had a look in the souvenir shop back in our hotel. There was an amazing range of DVDs and books about meerkats, but I finally chose 2 posters, and my sister got a couple of cool t-shirts with meerkats on, one of which she gave to me, so we were very happy. So, does anyone want to ask me anything?
Test 1. Listening, Part 3. Exam practice. You'll hear 5 teenagers talking about their hobby, collecting different things. For questions 19 to 23, choose from the list A to H how each speaker feels about their hobby. Use the letters only once. There are 3 extra letters which you do not need to use. You now have 30 seconds to look at Part 3. Speaker 1.
I've collected figures from science fiction films for years. Mum says I used to spend hours playing with them, and we put up a shelf to make room for them all, even though there aren't that many of them. The figures started getting a bit expensive at one point, but what with presents and so on from relatives, I managed to keep going, and I spent all my money on them. Still, I guess there comes a time for every collector like me when you wonder why you're doing it, and you get into something else. It's bound to happen, I suppose, but they'll always have pride of place in my room.
Speaker 2.
I've met lots of other people my age who have collections of something or other, but I'd really love to know how many other teenagers like me still collect stamps. My granddad gave me his collection when I became old enough to really appreciate it, and I've never looked back. I've spent hours over the years adding to what he gave me, and I suppose by now it might be worth a bit, although I've never really checked. It's just valuable to me personally because of the family connection, but no one's really been as keen to see it as I'd hoped they'd be. I've taken it into school and some teachers had a look, but that's been about it.
Speaker 3.
I've still got a glass case in my bedroom where all my dolls are displayed. They're each dressed in the national costumes of different countries, so family and friends always knew what to buy me when they went on holiday. Even now, I sometimes get them out and rearrange them a bit in the way I used to. I don't think I'll ever stop doing that. And friends who come into my room are just amazed at how many I've got, which is great. I'll always tell them all about the dolls and the history of 1 or 2 of the most valuable ones. It makes me appreciate the whole collection more somehow.
Speaker 4.
I think for me, the magic went out of collecting for a while when the coins I collect became so easy to get online. The thrill of going into a little shop with my grandfather, never knowing what we'd find, was amazing, and that was lost when I started to buy them on websites. But since then, my interest has revived. My older sister's husband was fascinated by what I've managed to build up, And one day he showed me some blogs written by lots of other people who are coin collectors too. I had no idea it was still so popular among teenagers. I might even contribute to the blog.
Speaker 5.
For years, my older sister and I have been interested in collecting bits of jewellery. For me, it started when she used to take me into second-hand shops and we'd find rings and bracelets that were beautiful and really cheap. Now it seems lots of those pieces are vintage, so they've become fashionable again, and they're actually worth quite a bit now too, which is amazing. But we'd never sell them, and we'll keep on adding to them while we can still afford it. It's a bit of an obsession now, and anyway, it's lovely that so many people notice when we wear some of it. They always seem to want to know how we got it.
Test 1. Listening Part 4. Exam practice. You'll hear an interview with a boy called Jamie Davidson, who has just tried rock climbing for the first time. For questions 24 to 30, choose the best answer, A, B or C. You now have 1 minute to look at Part 4.
Today I'm with 15-year-old Jamie Davidson, who's just taken up rock climbing. Jamie, tell us all about your first climb. You went to a climbing centre, didn't you?
That's right. I'd wanted to go rock climbing for years, but my family weren't keen. Then the youth group I belonged to organised a trip to the centre, and that's how I found myself setting off on a weekend beginners course. It turned out that the centre was set at the foot of some very high and scary-looking rocks. And there was a sailing school a few miles away too, although the sea always looked a bit rough where we were.
So how did it feel when you first put on all your climbing equipment?
A bit strange, really. There was loads of stuff, and we had to make sure everything we were given fitted perfectly. For example, it was important that the shoes we wore would grip the rocks properly and wouldn't slip. We also had lots of different ropes and hooks to attach us to the rock face, which our guide told us all about, and we had to put it all on in the right order. I didn't really begin to feel like a proper climber until I got it all on. Then I finally felt ready to tackle whatever lay ahead, and off we went.
So tell us something about your guide.
Well, he was called Max, and he was only 23. He'd done his first climb at the age of 15, like me. He told us that we should always climb with a smile on our faces to show everyone what a great time we were having. I wasn't convinced. But once we started, I began to see what he meant. He also got us to check the whole length of our ropes, which I could see was important. He told us that the good climbers do that on every climb, in case the ropes had developed a weakness in them.
So how easy was it once you started to climb?
Well, Max led us up the rocks at quite a speed. He obviously didn't have any problem finding things to hold on to, but I certainly did, sadly, and I really just wished I could keep up with him. A few drops of rain had started falling too, although I didn't really notice. I was too busy struggling to hold on to the rocks, and the tips of my fingers were really hurting, but I was determined not to let any of that stop me. I was going to get to the top.
And then Max told you to try letting go of the rock, didn't he? How did you feel?
Oh, that was the hardest moment. He said he wanted to train us to trust our equipment so that we wouldn't feel scared, and I was fairly happy everything was secure. There was a moment, though, when I couldn't help wondering, when I saw the ropes tightening under my weight. But most of the people in my group were having a go without any problems, so that made me feel better.
And eventually you and your group got to see the view from the top, didn't you?
Yes, we did. It felt like a bit of a reward for the climb, as although you couldn't exactly see for miles because of the mist, there were loads of birds just flying around above our heads and over the treetops. The whole scene was just like I'd seen in the posters for the climbing centre, and it brought back memories of looking out right from the top of a castle we visited once on holiday. That was amazing too.
So what did you do when you got to the top?
Well, we had a kind of group picnic for lunch, where everyone shared all the different food they'd brought, which was lucky as mine was still back at the climbing centre, so I felt rather bad, but no one minded. The sun was quite hot, but we were able to take off some of the thick clothing we were wearing. It was all very relaxing after a tiring climb, and I'll definitely go climbing again, except next time I'll take a slightly better camera than I had this trip.
Right. Well, thanks very much for talking to us, Jamie.